Alright, so first and foremost, happy International Rafael Nadal Day for those who celebrate. I have had this video on my mind for quite a bit, considering that my glorious king turns 40 this year, and boy, is that just a handful to think about. Few sentences in the world that make me feel older than reading out Rafa Nadal, 40-year-old retired tennis player and father of two. But no less, feliz cumpleaños to my GOAT. Y'all really didn't think I was going to miss out on a Rafa Nadal 40th birthday video, did you now? So let's get into it. You guys have seen the title. These are the 10 greatest Rafael Nadal moments of all time, sprinkled in with my personal preference here. So obviously my own little sentimental value will be evaluated here because it is my list. And, unfortunately I couldn't see his career from the very beginning. Little 2010 slanted, and also my personal sentimental value that I placed upon these different moments as well, taken into account, as well as, just as I always try to do with these things, putting in a little bit of holistic review in terms of just how valuable these moments were to his career and his broader career story as well. But before we get kicked off, I'm just going to put up here my personal list, excluding how these moments made me feel, and just as unbiased as I can, without personal preference, these are what I believe to be Rafael Nadal's 10 greatest moments of all time. Give those a couple seconds, and with that out of the way, let's kick this puppy off at number 10, the Olympic Golds. Now, for a while there, it's been contested how prestigious the Olympic gold really is, how valued it should be in the career of a tennis player, but obviously what has not been disputed is how much the players themselves value the Olympic Games and medaling during the course of them. And while Andy Murray remains the only guy to win it multiple times in singles, Rafa Nadal as well has multiple gold medals to his name, one in 2008 in singles, one in doubles in 2016, both very telling of different phases of Rafa's career. And well, all in all, a very nice feather in the cap to have that exclusive club of, I believe, 5 players that have done the career Golden Slam. And in 2008, more or less a continuation of the famous line at the end of the 2008 Wimbledon final by Andrew Castle, "There's a new man at the helm of men's tennis." At this point in the event he had played prior in Cincinnati, Nadal's famous 32-match win streak through the summer of 2008 had concluded, but the Rafa train got right back on the wagon here at the Beijing Olympics. All in all, pretty fun tournament for Nadal and a display of more of the apex of this iteration of Rafa in 07, 08, as he began slanting into more of an offensive player while still possessing his peak speed. Obviously, 2 standout matches, semis and finals, a really tightly contested semifinal against Novak Djokovic, very fun match there that ultimately might have honestly proven to be the de facto gold medal match. Already at that point, Novak had proven to be a handful on hard courts for anybody. Razor-thin margins deep into a tightly contested third set. We all know how it ended. One of the more famous Djoko smashes in the final wouldn't be left up to chance. If you've seen the highlights, that is honestly one of the more underrated and thorough Nadal masterclasses on what, to the eye, was a pretty fast hardcourt that year at the Beijing Olympics. I know the tournament itself has played slower since, but a landmark victory for Nadal there in the midst of one of his peaks 8 years later at a diametrically opposed place where in the 2008 Olympics, this was the man. He was atop the mountaintop. 2016, underrated moment, honestly, singles and doubles. But in the broader context, in what had been a smooth ride to the top and stay there outside of injuries to that point, 2015-16 had brought upon sort of uncharted territory for Rafa at that point, sort of floating in the second half of the top 10 in 5 through 10. A confidence crisis throughout 2015, and just when you thought in the spring of 2016, when maybe he had a little something going there was signs of life, quickly snuffed out with brutal timing for a wrist injury midway through Roland Garros. And honestly, if you watched him throughout the Rio Olympics in 2016, it still seemed like he was hitting his forehand sort of gingerly, holding back a little bit, not completely confident. And it really seemed like he shrugged all of it off, really with the intent that I'm not going to miss another Olympics, as the knees forced him out in 2012, the first year he was going to be the flag bearer. But still, what we saw on the court seemed to be quite encouraging signs again from what we had seen from him in the spring of 2016. In real time, it was very hard to keep perspective in all of this, but because it had been a really long, like 1.5 last 2 years for him, felt like it was like, how many more backbreaking losses can we really take at this point, man? But hindsight is 2020, and in hindsight, very encouraging loss to future silver medalist Juan Martín del Potro that tournament. And of course, he was pulling double duty with Marc Lopez, he has had quite a bit of success over the years in doubles, won 2 Indian Wells titles, I believe. Very close friend of his, would in the future be in the box as well for Rafa as a part of the team. And Nadal playing for Spain has always felt like different gravy, like just the sort of infectious energy he gives off in every match he plays. It's like amped up to 100 in team competitions. And even under playing in doubles, I remember this being as fixated as I've ever been on doubles tennis. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of the run itself. Quite frankly, I don't even remember the specifics that well myself, outside of the fact that they beat Romania and Horia and Tecau in the gold medal match. But man, was it awesome to just see how much it meant to Rafa, and being able to share the moment in one of the most like strenuous individual sports that there is. It was awesome, and you could really tell it meant something to share it with one of his best friends on tour. And quite frankly, at the time, and you'll notice a pattern here, there have been several moments over the years, but I think this was probably the first that you could point to and say that this right here would have been a perfectly understandable and great place, honestly, to call it quits. I know that sounds crazy now, but you think about it. He had just turned 30 that summer. From the time he'd come on tour, the pundits had been saying left and right, this is probably going to make for a shorter shelf life, at least in terms of length of his career relative to other great players in history. And 30, late 20s had at that time been the typical point where you start slowing down. And honestly, we thought we were seeing it in real time with the better part of the last 2 years. Post RG 2014. I know when he won that doubles gold in 2016, that was the first time that I thought about the R word, where I was like, could he maybe call it quits here in short order? Because yeah, everybody wants that fairy tale ending. You want to go out on a high, but thank God that he didn't. Alright, so number 9 is going to be the first entry here, and the only entry that came with Rafa Nadal not winning the tournament, and that is the 2012 Australian Open run. Of course, when I'm recording this, I am doing so having watched the entirety of the documentary. I have always said that I felt like the best that Nadal ever hit his forehand was that 2012-2014 window. If you really study it, the mechanics of that forehand have changed quite a bit throughout the course of his career. But I think that sweet spot was in that period. The problems with that Djokovic matchup and him not being able to as reliably and persistently go with the forehand cross, the best margin play, the high percentage play that had broke down righty backhands the entirety of his career to that point for the most part. He was forced to tweak, he was forced to go out of his comfort zone. And the repertoire was just crazy. I mean, it always was an all-time great forehand, but in this window, it made him the most willing he's ever been, in my opinion, to go up the line. Half volleys, still having like most of his mobility to dance around and make a lot of these backhands, these crazy, for mere mortals, really high difficulty inside in, inside out forehands that were like his stock play. All in all, it just felt like he could do whatever he wanted off the forehand in that period, put the ball in a dime from whatever position. And well, that all started here in the Aussie Open of 2012. You could tell from the get-go Nadal was playing with a bit of renewed confidence, swagger about him. You heard the rumblings of him having tweaked the racket for the first time, really adding weight onto it to go for more power. And if you've seen the documentary at this point, you'll know that a lot of these tweaks I'm talking about, turns out they were very deliberate and indeed honed in on upping the aggression with his forehand. And yeah, he immediately hit the ground running. He breezed through the first week, and yeah, the final gets all the attention here for obvious reasons, but the last 3 matches that Rafa Nadal played at the 2012 Australian Open are some of the most entertaining top-shelf Nadal matches of all time, of his entire career. And I think, honestly, you could argue the Beatz match might have been the most entertaining of the lot. Like, that match in particular, his forehand was an absolute flamethrower, and Beatz was peaking on the day. 2 of them hit the cover off the ball for over 4 hours in that match, and I would rank that match in Nadal's, like, top 10 hardcourt performances ever. It really is that good. Goes without saying, Federer and him played an exceptional match as well. I also look back on this tournament really fondly, considering it's the first time I got started on this Australian Open tradition of waking up at 3 a.m. to watch your favorite play here in the States on Eastern Time. Couldn't have picked a better tournament for that. And even though the final that I watched all 6 hours of left me sobbing unconsolably, it's without a doubt one of the leading moments in Nadal's career of an ability that I think, in my opinion, maybe I'm biased, but it's why, in my opinion, I think that he's the biggest magnet for all-time great matches, and who I would probably point to throughout the course of my watching tennis, in who's been a part of the most great matches throughout the course of their career. And as much as I hate to reduce stuff to cliches, there is a bit of an inexplicable quality to it, but it's just Nadal's ability to find another gear, oftentimes in the face of what looks like just insurmountable quality from the opponent, or just pressure that's being applied over and over again. Especially later on in his career, he's been in his fair share of being on the losing end of these matches, but I feel like so often over the year, he has just elevated matches to places that, quite frankly, it didn't feel like they had any business going. And this Australian Open final, what started with so much promise and feeling like this final was such a great opportunity to get right. Djokovic coming off of 5 hours with Murray. Rafa finding a higher level, encountering the battering that he'd taken over the course of the last year at the hands of one guy in all these big finals. What turned into promise, him taking the first set narrowly, tacking on more mileage on the Djokovic legs, it quickly turned into, well, shit. We're just going to have to accept a consolation prize, huh? Because once Nadal double faulted to give up that second set, we got to 3-4, love 40 in the fourth, and it's like, okay, well, this looks like more of the same. The Djokovic freight train seems out of control at this point. It seems like he's just about to bury Nadal again. And yeah, I mean, the points that he played to save that love 40 game, one of the craziest, ballsiest holds I have ever seen. How Nadal slammed the brakes on that one, and I've asked that question several times in such situations, it really is unfathomable. And obviously it meant a lot for that match getting to where it did. I've talked about at length, of course, how iconic it was and how big it was in that sense in my Djokovic-Nadal rivalry video in the past in 2024. But actually, I think the phenomenon that I'm trying to convey can be summed up quite well by the Eurosport, I believe, commentary when he ended up stealing that fourth set. Yeah, personally, this is still, to this day, I felt it at the time, nothing has changed. It's still the match that I would want back more than any other in Rafa's career. I have seen 4-2 30-15 in my nightmares since. As devastating a loss as I have encountered as a fan of sports, but no question, he did us proud that night and that tournament. Number 8. Personally for me, Aussie Open 12, even as a loss, kind of means more to me. Mainly because I was watching, and I wasn't back in '09. I got there 1 year later, and quite frankly, if I was there for this one, I can guarantee it would rank higher. In a vacuum, this might be the most impressive tournament of Nadal's career. If not, it is right up there. Talked about Beijing in '08. That was sort of the last bit of juice Nadal had before all the matches sort of added up for him. But with the offseason, he kicked off the new year exactly where he started, remained the best player in the world, quickly diversifying his skill sets and expanding his reach even to the hard courts. Dominant up through the semifinals, and then, of course, there, 2 titanic matches in a row. The first of which, I think from just a pure highlight reel perspective, the 2009 Aussie Open semifinal is definitely on the short list of the highest quality matches played of all time. It is just bonkers good. Fernando Verdasco for a night just possessed by the gods, breathing fire off of both wings, really from anywhere on the court. Rafael Nadal at the best of his retrieving and just compete grit capabilities, capturing a handful, actually, of points that would go down on his career highlight reel. 5 hours, 14 minutes of tennis, just of the absolute highest quality. Nadal taking it home by a hair. And then, of course, adding a couple more shots from his career highlight reel in the final. As for 4 sets, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal put forth one of the absolute finest editions of their historic rivalry. This final, another display of just peak Nadal clutchness. That third set in particular that proved to be decisive. And off that 5-hour plus semifinal, somehow when we got to a 5th set, it was Nadal whose legs were still in perfect working order. Broke Roger Federer's heart again and cemented what you would probably have to say is Nadal's best 52-week run of his entire career. Of course, that being '08 clay season, extending past this tournament actually and into the spring of 2009. All told, 84-8 in that span. 10 titles, 3 slams across the 3 different surfaces. As I said before, 32 match win streak as well across all 3 surfaces. 5 Masters 1000, an Olympic gold. Wemby '08 needs no introduction. Probably his best ever Roland Garros run as well. Dominant, generational run. Punctuated here in spectacular fashion at the 2009 Australian Open final. Dickie Enberg said it best. Number 7. I love this one. This one really leans into personal preference. The What Happn-ed 2019 season. Now, we all know the press conference. We know the line. It has become iconic in and of itself and a bit of a meme. But let me set the scene for you guys. To that point in the year, May of 2019, this was as down a season as can be. And yeah, these are the alien standards of the Big Three. But as down a season as can be when you make the final of the first Grand Slam of the year in your first official action back for the first time in 3 months. Given that and what an injury-marred ending to 2018 it was, you could live with the outcome of getting rocked in the Australian Open final. There was a little more injury trouble in Indian Wells as well with the knee again. But clay was supposed to fix all. And well, it didn't. This was, since 2004, I believe, the longest Nadal had gone titleless to start a season. And while it wasn't 2015, more than their fair share at that point were raising their eyebrows like, what's going on here? And from press at the time, Nadal himself seemed a little bit discouraged by the fact that these injuries from the end of 2018 were carrying on, and was in a bit of a mental funk. Played a horrible match in Monte Carlo, losing to Fabio Fognini. Played another horrible opener in Barcelona, at which point I believe Rafa has alluded to he was thinking of just sort of taking a break given the spot he was in mentally. And albeit as the matches would go from that point, he got a little bit better and better. But absolutely nothing to suggest the performance he was about to put forth in Rome after he dropped that pre-tournament press quote. He dropped the "what happened" quote, and boom, the guy was dishing out bagels, breadsticks left and right the rest of the week. Honestly underrated among Nadal's best clay court tournaments, but at the end of that tournament, we had gone from, boy, that King of Clay crown looks like it's shaky this year, right back to, oh, yeah, that's the guy right there that has dominated the last 2 clay court swings. RG is basically just a formality, and more or less it was. I mean, Dominic Thiem fought valiantly. The first 2 sets of that final are absolutely phenomenal. There was a fight, but there was only one way that was going to end. It took a while to get to that level, but RG12 was in the bag, resoundingly at that. But what if I told you after he dropped that "what happened" quote, he proceeded to lose a grand total of 2 times the rest of the season? Went from a potential down year, and in the midst of it, for one of the only times in his career looking like he really wasn't enjoying himself out there, to just an absolute rampage to close the year. And when you zoom out, one of the more statistically impressive years of his career. I mean, the usual consistency, excellence that defined elite post-prime Nadal. Wins in Rome, Roland Garros, Montreal, and the US Open semis of all 4 slams. Finals in 3 out of 4. And all of that earning him the world #1, which seemed like it was just not in the realm of possibility. Entering Rome that year with Djokovic winning Australia and just winning Madrid the previous week. Easily one of the most enjoyable years of his career, and also punctuated with a one-man wrecking crew sort of effort during the Davis Cup, pulling double duty again, singles, doubles, undefeated through it all, and probably playing some of the best indoor tennis of his entire career. Perfect way to punctuate the year, and 2019 in general, really just a testament to the guy's stick-to-itiveness, his love for the process. Almost tapped out by his own admission mid-season, but just kept his head down, and boy, did the results follow. Number 6, I bet you guys are going to be surprised by how relatively low down I have this one. Hell, I kind of am for what it meant. But the 2022 Australian Open, as you can see on my, taking personal preference out list, I have this one top 3. I understand it might even be a lot of people's number 1. Maybe it's the childlike whimsy and stuff, actually experiencing in real time as a kid, the moments ahead of it for the most part. But yeah, the miracle in Melbourne. An extraordinary run in so many ways, and personally, and I know to a lot of Rafa stans, felt like the tennis gods giving us one back for all the anguish and bad breaks that Nadal caught down under between his first title there and this one. It made it oh so gratifying that what I know I felt was a long overdue and deserved second title. You know, you can't ever say someone's entitled to something, but there were so many close shaves. Obviously, the 2014 finals run ending the way that it did, it just felt so cursed that we never got that double career Grand Slam. And the fact that it happened here, by the time it felt like that ship had sailed, and doing so in just the most odds-defying, unlikely fashion. I said it then, and I've remained unchanged since, but that victory literally made it so I had 0 regrets with how Rafa Nadal's career went. He won that second Australian Open title, and that was it. I was content. I was I would not have it any other way. And yeah, it's regarded to as the miracle in Melbourne. It's a miracle in so many different ways. Missing the last 6 months, basically, of 2021, catching the virus weeks ahead of the tournament, a pretty old, 35 years old at that point, and a really in form and pretty sizable favorite going into the tournament in Daniil Medvedev. Of course, not to mention how the actual final, once he played that guy, how it unfolded for the opening half of the match. But even before we got there, from the off, again, another trend throughout Rafa's career. Contrary to popular belief, for some reason, people are just like, he needs rhythm, he needs matches. Hasn't really been the case with Nadal off long injury layoffs. He's typically come back and started playing well in short order. And this time, yeah, no different. It was good enough. I will say, for Rafa haters, I've always thought you should be more mad at Denis Shapovalov than you are Medvedev for how this tournament unfolded, because Nadal's just stock game coming back was good enough to beat everybody on the lead up to the final, and it shouldn't really have come that close with Shapo, but it was super hot that day. He was bossing the match, but, Shapo kept him out on court long enough that he just really started struggling with fatigue and the conditions. And for all intensive purposes, Shapovalov had him dead to rights there. He just did not put him away. He was absolutely there to be snuffed out. But, as was so common from a lot of these 90s guys, once we got to a fifth set and victory was a distinct possibility, he kind of shrunk. Whereas the final, I would say very slightly, not by much at all, but for the last 4 sets or so, I would say Nadal had very thinly the better of play. I would say the Alcaraz comeback has, of course, usurped it last year, but it still remains one of the most batshit crazy comebacks in a slam final that there will ever be. Starting with, from the get-go and throughout the entirety of this match, even the portions where Rafa started getting his teeth into the match and even having the better of play, his serve was under siege the entire match. He got 2 really tough holds in the first set, but that was not sustainable. The bottom fell out quickly. The second set, again, sort of living dangerously, but was able to get the early break, keep his nose out in front, until, of course, he couldn't. Blew it, serving the set out. Sort of blew it in the tiebreak as well. And that second really felt like it was all or nothing. Especially as an old guy. I mean, throwing like an hour and a half or a little bit under that into that second set. Felt like he had to have it. And not being able to parlay it into that point that he lost at 2-3 love 30, where he couldn't put away an overhead, ended up losing the point, goes down love 40. That felt like the dagger. And 99 out of 100 times, it is the dagger. I have no idea how he still believed at that point, how he still was able to compartmentalize into that mentality that has defined him his entire career of just like putting everything else aside, focusing on playing the next point and the next point after that. One thing to do so mentally, another as well to just keep being up to the task physically as well. He was exhausted at portions of that match, but he just kept himself going somehow. Kept just somehow passing test after test on serve as well. Another heroic love 40 stand in the third, and then takes that third set. And, as fans, I know all of us were just like, holy shit, like, we can be really proud of this effort. This guy is unbelievable. And then slowly, it's like, oh, do we have a shot here? This is getting way too real. I did not plan on myself stressing this much. I did not plan on this match still being going the longer it went. And then ultimately, serving it out, we got to 5-4 in the fifth. He goes up 30 love, gets broken. And everybody, including Rafa himself, is seeing those 2012, 2017 break up in the fifth, replay in their head, and it's just like, oh my god, please, not again. I cannot take another one of these. Next Medvedev service game, 30-15, hits one of the most underrated shots I think of his entire career. Great feel, still moving up to the drop shot to maneuver it by Daniil at net. Gave himself another look to serve it out. Second time of asking, did so. And as an adult, as a grown man, I have never had sports just have me just feel like a kid again with Just the amount of elation, relief, jumping up and down, screaming, running around my apartment. Turned out actually until later that year. But before that, for the first entry of the top 5, we're taking it back to 2017. I've said this before, but my belief in Rafael Nadal throughout my time as a fan has, for 99% of it, had my faith be absolutely unwavering. There has not really been a single time until, of course, the big one at the back end, 2023 Australia, where he was already trending downwards, but it was also like, yeah, at that age, sustaining a major hip injury, I don't know that there's coming back from that. That could very well be the crushing blow. But the only other time that I truly was convinced that it was over was after he lost the round of 16 match in 2016 at the Open to Puy. That wasn't close to the worst loss that Nadal had taken in this rough patch of his post-RG Wimbledon 2014. But for me, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, the cumulative, just back-breaking losses, really without respite other than the spring of 2016, plus health just marring that 2016 season as well. Even the good felt like all for naught. It felt like one step forward to take 3 back. And I will always maintain that I genuinely feel that the 2017 comeback is the most impressive. Because you look at years like 2009 and 2012 that led into 10 and 13. The guy was playing exceptional. Both times he just hit the physical wall. But on the other side of it, I was still convinced, like, for one, he's 23 and 25 heading into those years. He's still super young. He may be sidelined, but he's going to come back no problem. Even heading into 2022 is like, there's some decline here happening for sure. But I don't think it's close to terminal. He's still playing well enough. Relative to the field, this is still clearly a top 2 guy to me. But heading into 2017... forget, top 2 guy relative to the field. Is he even a top 3 guy on clay anymore? The forehand that once felt like it never missed at all without, sacrificing a smidge of potency or lethality. The same shot was reliably crumbling in pressure spots for the better part of 2 years. And I think it's really cool in his post-playing career, starting with the Players Tribune article he wrote last year, I think, as well as expanding upon it in the documentary series about the mental health component of it all, the dealing with anxiety, and with what we know now, the Charlie Moya just completely revamping of his mindset. It is really eye-opening beyond just what we were given at the time, which was, just the confidence crisis. But yeah, year started out, made his way through a 3rd round at the Australian Open, the exact type of match he was routinely losing over the last 2 years. After 2 years of just rough sledding in 5th sets, mostly against middling competition, finally was able to have one go his way, rallying from a set down, and then 2 sets to 1 down against the upstart Sasha Zverev. Little by little, it's like, oh wow, he's through to his first major quarterfinal in almost 2 years. And then, damn, he's through to his first major semifinal in almost 3 years. And improving as the tournament goes, we get to the semifinals, a legitimately very high-level contest with Grigor Dimitrov. Some vintage Nadal clutchness down the stretch of that one, and all of a sudden, I was sort of believing again. At that point in time, he was in a great spot still in the Federer matchup. I was sort of like, okay, played close to 5 hours in the semi again, but I think he's going to do it. And that final did have a little bit of a different feel to it as it went on. In fact, the way Fed played in the 3rd set, at that point I was kind of like, yeah, this was a great run back, but this is where it ends. And Federer, throughout that match, blew a little hot and cold, so Rafa was able to get it to a 5th. Realistically, down the stretch of that match, he was just kind of outplayed. Even to get out to that 3-1 lead in the 5th, he held off the break points as long as he could. But then the dam broke, and calling a spade, Roger Federer just flat out earned that one, exercised his demons against Rafa. But in the moment, all it took was losing a break lead and a couple missed forehands in pressure situations again, and I was like, well, This entire return to form was a complete mirage. He fluked his way to the final. This was probably his last chance to get off of 14 slams, and he screwed it. And the ensuing couple months did nothing really to move me off of that. I was particularly disgusted by that Acapulco and Miami final. Again, pragmatically, it was like, alright, we're doing really well to start the year, going deep everywhere. Clay court season's on the horizon. He's probably going to be hard to beat. But in the moment, I just wasn't buying it. I mean, Monte Carlo, Barcelona was sort of like, okay, easy draws. Monte Carlo, Barcelona not moving me. That changed in Madrid, particularly, albeit 2017 Djokovic, not that good, but when it's your rivals, it always commands some level of respect. And Nadal, for his part, really, really good after his opener throughout the course of that event, in the semi as well. And then the final, I think one of the only times Dominic Thiem and Rafa Nadal on clay both simultaneously played really well together. That one in particular, it was like, alright, he's back. Even I can deny it no longer. And, you know, holistically, just a sensational clay court season. You know the story. Goes to RG. Statistically, his most dominant Roland Garros campaign of all time. Played with real hunger. Played like a guy that hadn't won a major in 3 years. And was feeling like he was back where he belonged. And that really ushered in, I think, like a 3-year stretch where I would say he was the best player in the world. It's the very best of Moya Dahl, 2017 through 19. Maybe the most consistent that he ever was against the field. And really, that part of it extends all the way up to Wimbledon 2022. And also a really good argument to be made, 2017 through 2019, maybe the most fun to watch version of Nadal. Sort of that sweet spot you see in the early mid-30s of just becoming like a smarter player, maybe the most skilled version all around. And if you asked me, even as late as Q1 of 2017, I never could have fathomed him even having one season like 2017, let alone this entire phase of elite play in his 30s that it ushered in and saw him win 8 more slams. But revisiting what I said before about later in 2022 recreating that same sort of childlike whimsy, euphoria, just pure ecstasy. Here we are, 2022 Roland Garros. In many ways, I've always viewed the other side of that pandemic break when the tour resumed in the fall of 2020. As far as Rafael Nadal is concerned, I do feel like that was the line of demarcation for him. I feel like the best elite part of his post-prime was 2017 into 2020 pre-pandemic break. Honestly, again, he did this repeatedly throughout his career, but he overplayed end of 2019 into early 2020. Still, it was a very high-level match that he lost by very fine margins to Thiem in Australia. Won Acapulco as well right before the tour was suspended. And with what we have found out since, the Nadal camp actually coming into Roland Garros 2022 sort of led on that it was a similar state of affairs going into Roland Garros 2020 with the foot. And this foot problem had largely been under the radar unless you read Nadal's book from 2011. Most people really didn't know about that degenerative foot condition and defect for him, because largely their solution of the insoles had kept it at bay. I think really the only time I can think of before he shut it down in 2021 where the foot was giving him problems, at least as far as ones that I saw, was Wimbledon 2011 in the 4th round against Delpo. And his book actually also told us that at the time of the Wimbledon 08 final, the foot was also giving him problems then. And what it's read as to me has been sort of that large chunk of inactivity throughout 2020 seemed to really accelerate the damage to his foot, because they have said that heading into Roland Garros 2020 he was not in great shape. And without a doubt, like I said before, while still elite, you do start to see a little bit more vulnerability, a little bit more slippage. as we move through the 2020s. And if you put it under a little bit of scrutiny, you will notice that on the other side of the pandemic break, Nadal kind of struggled to string together more than 3 months at a time without getting hurt again. And so really, I think after Australia and Acapulco 2022, it really started to be apparent that Rafa's body was kind of being held together by pins and needles, and that sort of he was on borrowed time. That fact never more apparent than the event leading into Roland Garros in 2022, as a match where he was rolling Shapovalov quickly turned into a bit of a sad state of affairs. That foot problem really just giving him hell and sort of putting his Roland Garros participation up in the air. Of course, he made his way out to Paris, but as that tournament went on, the quotes that were coming out of Nadal, it was really scary as a fan. It was probably the saddest that I felt when being faced with the prospect of him retiring, even more so than when it actually happened, because at that point, it felt like he had honestly already been retired for a little bit. But during RG 2022, he was just openly saying, like, I can't be sure of anything. Like, straight up, the next match I play could always be my last. And while at the end, we had plenty of time where he was sidelined to sort of prep ourselves, at that time, I was kind of shocked. I was like, dude, I'm not ready for this. How? How is this the end? We got out to like a 20-0 start to the year. Won the last slam that was played. How in the world are we a couple months on and it could be over? So that part was looming. It was overhanging throughout the entirety of this tournament run. Of course, we know that after round 2, the foot was again killing him. And so again, he openly told the media that, like, yeah, we're going to anesthetize the foot. I'm going to play with the foot numbed. It could have further reaching, bigger ramifications, but for this tournament, I am willing to put it all on the line, because straight up, this could be it. And what can you say? I mean, your typical Rafa rolls through the first 3 rounds. It was going perfectly along schedule. Of course, his ranking was still on its way back up from not playing the second half of 2021, so he got put in the Djokovic quarter, but it was like, alright, if Nadal can keep finding his A-game, even at this stage of his career, he still should be live to beat anybody on Chatrier. And well, that outlook changed a whole lot in round 4 when, just for the 3rd time in his entire Roland Garros career, he was stretched 5 sets from the most unlikely of sources in Felix Auger-Aliassime. Nadal's level fluctuated quite a bit in this one, as you'd expect for a guy who was 36 years old soon. Felix played the best match he's ever played on clay, and when Nadal was good in this match, he was class. But the worry was, of course, he had logged over 4 hours and 5 sets on court ahead of a match with Novak Djokovic, who had just started rounding back into form, dominating his way through the Rome field and straight setting everyone in his path heading into this quarterfinal date. Not to mention fresh off of handing Rafa just his 3rd loss and 1st in the semifinals or beyond stage at Roland Garros the previous year. So he headed into this quarterfinal. Nadal, one of the few times legitimately he was an underdog in his Roland Garros career, which just made it all the more like head-scratching what in the world is going on when he raced out to a 6-2 3-0 lead in a match that resembled more the 2020 final than the 2021 semi between the two. Like, legitimately watching the match, it was like, this has been like unsettlingly easy. I'm kind of scared. And indeed it was. Of course, from there, the match had several more twists and turns. Quite literally, this match, more than any other I've felt watching it, resembles that meme of, like, the chart that's going up and down, being like, we're so back, and it's so over, just over and over again. But like I said in my season tier list video, 2022, that first half of that year was such a magic carpet ride. It really felt like a tour de force, like, time capsule of everything that made Rafa special. Like, for some reason, a guy nearing 36 won his 2nd longest match of his career over 5 hours to start the year in Melbourne, 4-0 in 5-setters before the bottom fell out for him post-Wimbledon. But even once he recovered his game, in that second elite phase of his career, those pressure situations, fifth sets included, deciding sets, he wasn't as secure. He was subject to way more nerviness than when he was younger. Obviously, that tends to happen with guys that are older. But 2022 was a throwback in all the best ways in that regard. And in the Djokovic match, he bounces back from losing this double break lead, resets, regains control, then in the fourth again, saves himself from seeing a fifth set, saving 2 set points on Djokovic's serve, and then out-dueling Tajbrekovic. And again, as one of the only times Nadal by the masses was considered an underdog at Roland Garros, and just given all the context, even before he lifted the trophy that fortnight, that win, easily one of the most gratifying that I have ever experienced as a fan. And I mean, at that point, we all kind of got the hunch that the winner of that match probably was going to raise the trophy. Obviously, given the form Zverev was in, you expected that to be a tough out. And it turned out to be even more so than expected. Even more so once we saw that the match, the semi, was going to be played under a closed roof. Because it's been reinforced again in week 2 of this year's tournament. Playing under that Chatrier roof is brutal. It is really, really hard to hit through that court once the roof is closed. And well, that match was survival of the fittest. I can't even lie though, people were gassing the quality of that match. That match was a mess. Unlike the quarter, Nadal did not at all have the A game. There was another show of peak Nadal clutchness. A blast from the past, if you will. 2-6 down in the first set tiebreak. Some bonkers clutch forehands down the stretch of that breaker. And then that second set, especially, absolute crapshoot. Nobody could hold serve. Horrible misses out the wazoo. Zverev sporadically playing great. And again, the nature of how Chatrier plays under the roof. They just had playing conditions as an absolute hellhole. But in the end, you know, if you are to say something great about this match, Nadal's renewed just mental giant and endurance conditioning overall, more than anything, that came up huge. And of course, unfortunately, up a set and heading to a second set breaker, Zverev suffered that catastrophic injury going over on his ankle, and Rafa was through in the most anticlimactic, unfortunate, sort of confusing ways. And then the final, if there is one thing we got out of that Breakpoint documentary in 2022, it was that footage in the tunnel. It was over before it started. Final Sunday, as it's so often been over the years for Rafa at Roland Garros, it was a coronation. It was more or less a procession. He cruised out to 6-3 and then trailed, I believe it was 1-3 in the second set before just rattling off the last 11 games of the match. Just Nadal and Chatrier things, and turned out for one last time. Truth be told, I thought it was perfectly reasonable that he did not call it quits there. I didn't really understand that in real time either. A lot of people thought that he should have just stopped and were even anticipating a retirement announcement in his trophy ceremony speech. And yeah, in a perfect world, hindsight, when you know what happened, and particularly how little he had left after Wimbledon 2022, sure, yeah. But like I said earlier in this video, there are so many points in time that you could point to for Nadal that would have been perfect stopping points. But it turned out every time he still had more to give. And as a guy that had, for the first time in his entire career, won the first 2 slams of the season, I mean, why would he? He had to be sure that he had emptied the tank. And of course we got to that point soon after, but honestly, the way that RG 2022 played out, really the whole first half of 2022, it more or less does serve as the fairy tale ending. That whole run, first half of 2022, really was like a Rafael Nadal's greatest hits concert. And as fate would have it, as it should, that came to a crescendo at Roland Garros 2022. Number 3. In terms of pure enjoyment and amount of fun that I had really, for anything on this list, it is the entirety of the 2013 season. You will notice to this point on the list, the nature of Nadal's career, a lot of starting, stopping, a lot of injury comebacks, but really nothing quite like this one. To this point, Nadal's injury struggles, it had not resulted in just a complete standstill for this long. I mean, end of 2005, the initial diagnosis of his foot condition. He misses the back end of that season into early 2006, misses the Australian Open. 2009, similarly, knees start getting creaky midway through this season. Misses Wimbledon, unable to defend the title, and sort of limps to the finish line the rest of the season. But come July 2012, when Nadal walked off center court at Wimbledon in one of the shock upsets of the Big Three era, of this century probably, there was just nothing for 7 months, sidelined with patellar tendinitis. And it had to be immensely frustrating. This coming at a time in which, in 2012, to that point, he had been playing nothing short of phenomenally. When he got to Wimbledon, he had been in the finals of 8 of the last 9 slams. He was in touching distance again of recapturing the world number 1, and just smack dab in the middle of his prime. Now, unfortunately, from this point forward, these sort of extended breaks down to injuries started becoming a little bit more of a common theme, really for the remainder of his career. But what we got in 2013 on the return, especially, may I add, with what we know given the documentary now on that season, it was already nothing short of a miracle, but just all the more so with what we now know was going on behind the scenes. And this line right here by John McEnroe, as he was closing in on the decisive U.S. Open title for who was going to be the best player in the world that season, it sums it up pretty well.
So he's going to not play Australia and lose first round of Wimbledon and be our runaway one. And deservedly so.
This 2013 season by Rafa is right there among your top 3 contenders for best single calendar season of his career. And of the comeback years, I think it is pretty easily the most impressive in terms of the quality of his play, just the quality of the year itself on the bounce back. The ledger to end the season read, after missing Australia, by the way, because just a freak illness. But after that, 2 slams won in 3 played, that being Roland Garros, played and won it. Did Wimbledon happen this year? I don't think so. Then he went and played and won the U.S. Open, of course. Also, of course, logged a career high, both in Masters 1000 titles won for the year, 5, as well as top 10 victories for the year. Statistically, pretty easily the best hardcourt season of his career. In fact, you could even go as far as to argue that up through the U.S. Open, he was better on hardcourts this year than he was on clay, believe it or not. And this is no slouch of a Nadal clay court season, with 2 of the 3 Masters, Barcelona and Roland Garros. All-time great banner year. I don't need to bore you anymore with the context and the accolades. Let's just cut to the chase. One of my favorite parts of this Netflix documentary was the portion going into this season. We got the nugget of how his hardcourt season kicked off, because obviously to that point he had gotten started on clay in South America. And if that goddamn final run to Bostad in 2024 hadn't happened, I always expected Horacio Zeballos to be a great trivia answer in tennis history, where Rafa's first event back in Chile, actually, him losing the final to Zeballos was the only time that Nadal had lost a clay court final to somebody not named Djokovic, Federer, or Murray. Just another dummy Nadal on clay stat in a sea full of them. But anyways, obviously got Roland then, won in Brazil, and really emphatically in Acapulco announced the return, thumping David Ferrer in the final, who was, again, in the midst of a career best stretch, number 4 in the world at that point. But 2 games is all you get for Rafa on the comeback trail. And then, of course, now we know the story with Indian Wells. Him consulting his doctors, his team, everybody opposed to him going to Indian Wells. His knee not ready for it, by all accounts. And he makes this executive decision. He's like, I don't care. I want to play. We're going. Give me my anti-inflammatories. I'm good to go. And yeah, what happens? Amazing run. A couple of really nice matches. The Gulbis Classic late into the night. The final in particular rallies from a set and a breakdown. And a match that really was just a forehand howitzer off with Rafa and Delpo. Wins there, and the momentum just keeps going. He keeps winning. This was out there at the time, was that his knee was not 100% throughout even Euro clay court season and really the first half of the year in general. But as we know now, he's just continually taking anti-inflammatories throughout the course of this period. And of course, he reveals to us this is like puncturing his insides, literally. But I honestly put myself in his shoes, and I totally understand it. This dude is a psychopathic competitor, but that aside, that entire span, I guess you can cut it off at Aussie Open 2014 is when it sort of ceased to be the case where every time he stepped onto the court, he was playing just out of this world tennis. But he was playing so goddamn well throughout that period. And you look at it, and he missed so much time throughout the course of it. And honestly, yeah, in that spot, it's like, this is still my prime. I have missed enough time, and precious time at that. The mentality very much probably was, if I can help it, I'm going to push through. But so what happens during Euro clay court season? This is probably, of the big winning Nadal clay court seasons, easily the most arduous of his clay court seasons. You look at every single event barring Barcelona, and there are some really grindy matches in there. There's Dimitrov in Monte Carlo. In Madrid, there's the Ferrer match where he threw up this miraculous lob to avoid going down match point in the second set. In Rome, Ernie Gulbis again gives him an absolute battle. Ferrer does the same, but he just keeps on chugging. Survived all of those, the titles just kept coming, and he heads to Roland Garros almost unblemished, the one loss, of course, being one of Djokovic's best ever clay court performances in the final of Monte Carlo. And it's another year of Rafa versus Novak, both in the thick of their primes. A lot to gain and lose on both sides. Of course, 2012 through 14 also spelled out the only time, really, that Nadal had something resembling an equal on clay. 2012, by the time RG rolled around, it was advantage Nadal. 2013, sort of even, if not slightly tilting Nadal because of the clay season he put forth. And then 2014, slight advantage Djokovic. And of course, after one of the more sluggish Nadal first weeks of Roland Garros throughout his career, we did end up getting the dream match. Lived up to the billing. You guys know the story. In a way, sort of mirror match to the 2012 Australian Open final, where both probably had no business seeing a fifth set, if not for tremendous grit will shown by the loser of the match ultimately. And just when it seemed like the momentum of that steal of a fourth set might push them over the edge, one fatal mistake in the fifth set. Ultimately, in this case, Nadal escaped with another 9-7 in the fifth victory in a match where in the fifth set, the dude's forehand, even for Nadal forehand standards, was just like breathing fire. And after a clay court season where Ferrer got closer to Nadal than most of the times he fared off with his compatriot on clay throughout their careers, it was almost as if that was a tease to raise false hope going into this final, where Nadal just shook off a 4.5-hour semifinal to sort of just swat Ferrer away, to return to Grand Slam glory, his 13th in all, 8th Roland Garros at that point. More disappointment at Wimbledon followed, but all I really have to say is that this dude's year was so insanely great that he accumulated 0 points at 2 of the slams and was a runaway number one, really, with a number 2 whose season was no slouch at all, but he shook off the only real blemish of his season, absolutely going nuclear on the North American hard courts over the summer. To this day, only the 3rd ever man to complete that sweep of the Canadian Masters, Cincinnati, and the US Open. And I was at one of these matches. In fact, I will take it to my grave. This one will be one for the rocking chair, that I was in attendance at the Cincinnati Open, and not just for any match, for the Federer-Nadal quarterfinal. As in a sea of Roger Federer fans, there was little old 12-year-old me slapping my thigh after Rafa dropped the first set against a vintage Federer in an otherwise dismal summer for him that year. Low-key, one of the better matches that they have ever played outside of slams, and I had the honor of being there. And of course, the year was 2013, so Rafa found a way to turn the screws and get that one home. The US Open was ultimately set to decide whose year this was going to be deemed. But hey, truth be told, sometimes you could just tell who was winning the tournament based off of the US Open night kit under the lights. And come on, in the second round when Rafa came out in that gunmetal gray and pink, it just looked too crisp to not be a slam-winning outfit. And much like his first US Open title, but in different ways, it was another tour de force of what an A-plus Nadal is capable of, albeit this time in a little bit of a different way, mainly behind the power of that forehand at its precision and timing peak. Allowed him the confidence to stand closer to the baseline, be a bit more audacious in the shot selection. A lot of half volleys, a lot more often, it seemed like, decisions to take the forehand up the line. And why not when you are hitting that shot as confidently as he was in this period? It felt like you just could not slice him without him hitting a forehand the next ball. Still hadn't lost enough mobility to lose all the dancing around backhands to make forehands that he used to do to almost a ridiculous extent. But you couldn't argue with the shot that was coming off his forehand when he did so. And ultimately, that translated to one set lost en route to the final, only broken one time in all. And even against Novak, that would only be extended out to 3 more times in the final, and just the one set lost in an otherwise statement and relatively straightforward relative to their rivalry, especially at this time, US Open title win. Of course, sprinkled in there a bit of peak, maybe my personal choice for most epic sequence of Nadal's career, turning around that third set. One of his finest ever Houdiniacs, fending off a look for the double break. One of what was a bit of a theme throughout the course of his career. A lot of famous Love 40 escapes in huge spots. This one coming at 4-all deep into the third set. Those saves followed by that classic cat and mouse point. 30-15 in the next game at 5-4. And of course, punctuated with, and it had to be, the trademark bomb of a forehand down the line to break open the point and earn him that third set as he got down on bended knee, cranked out the lawnmower, as Arthur Ashe Stadium absolutely exploded into one of its trademark crowd pops. Remember it like it was yesterday. One of the best of his entire career, one that obviously was so emotional because it ultimately was what clinched the Player of the Year for him and put a bow on this spectacular 2013 comeback season, juxtaposed to a year ago where he had to miss the 2012 US Open. That plus also bringing full circle his second ascent of the mountain after Djokovic had presented this unprecedented matchup problem for him. Something that made it a very different challenge to scale, in some ways maybe even more difficult than the first time, where it was early in his career trying to catch mythical peak Roger Federer, and with each passing year as he's a young player developing more and more, he's getting closer and closer before ultimately kicking the door down in 2008. That close to the 2013 Slam season sort of completed the work that he began in 2012 in hitting back in the Djokovic matchup after he had just been dealt with a sucker punch of Novak ascending in 2011. The greats adapt, the greats find a way, and 2013, for all the winning, was a great exhibit of sort of all of that rolled into one, the skill, the will. It is the year, I think, that ultimately thrust him into that rare air among the greatest of all time sort of tier that he would occupy pretty much for the rest of his career from an all-time perspective. And it is for these many reasons that it is my favorite year of his entire career personally. 2013 Nadal, just epic in spades. Coming in at number 2, it's pretty clear-cut, let's be honest, that this should probably be number 1, and would be, if personal preference is completely out of the picture here. This is, and always will be, Rafael Nadal's defining moment. It has been so ever since deep into that evening Andrew Castle said the words, "There's a new man at the helm of men's tennis." You guys already know what it is. Wimbledon 2008, heralded by many and always a staple in that conversation for the greatest matches to ever be played. And obviously just an extremely revered feat for the winner, Rafa Nadal in this case. The Wimbledon 08 final is tennis. Tennis is the Wimbledon 08 final. And mind you, I say that as somebody who in real time didn't even know that this match was happening. But I can tell you in my soul, I don't just say that because I am a Nadal fanboy shill. That's always there, but genuinely I do mean that, and I will expand upon that as we talk about the match itself. But let me just set the scene. I'm sure many of you very familiar with the lore. Out of the box, Rafael Nadal is special, one of the great early bloomers in the history of this sport. But it just so happens that that coincides with the absolute gold standard for dominance, especially over an extended period, in the form of peak of his powers, Roger Federer. He is the man. He is the gold standard and sort of in a league of his own through the mid-2000s, particularly 04 to 07, dominated in a way that, again, for an extended stretch, hasn't probably been seen before or after. But of course, he has one foil, and quite literally from the jump, it is apparent that he has a matchup problem here with Nadal that he does not have at all, really, with anybody else on tour. Of course, Nadal at the time, great as he was, still in the midst of refining his game. But even out of the box, obviously, it was very apparent that this guy was going to be a bit of an anomaly on clay. You see the trend where the two cross paths en route to Nadal's first Grand Slam at RG05. Nadal defends his turf on clay. When he gets to Roger Federer, he's quite competitive and even winning at a decent clip. Certainly much better again than the rest of the tour at this time. But yeah, still a little raw. You wonder how soon it's going to be that he shows up to contend with Roger Federer, who is untouchable everywhere else. Turned out, wouldn't have to wait that long on grass. He made the final in 06. And it's Federer's turn. He's the one who defends the land on his domain on grass there. As a great young player does, Nadal is improving by the year. 07 in the Wimbledon final, another case of, in a great rivalry, I think mirror matches between the 09 Aussie final and that one within the confines of the Federer-Nadal rivalry. Combination of really, really clutch play from the winner and also sort of letting go of the rope at the end by the loser. Nadal has talked extensively about how this loss in the moment probably shattered him in a way that no other had. He really was right there, and it is worth noting that even up to the 2008 version of when these two faced off at Roland Garros at Wimbledon, Roger Federer, he is mostly coming out on the losing end on clay, but he is very, very competitive, and that included the 2008 season where, you know, from the jump, you got the first signs of vulnerability from the up to that point just untouchable Roger Federer. But for the mono affecting him early in that season, A lot of people forget that because of just the anomaly and the magnitude of beatdown that the '08 RG final was, is that Roger Federer was actually as competitive as ever with Nadal on clay throughout the course of the clay court season. I mean, he loses like 5-5, I think, in Monte Carlo. Second set, he loses a 4-0 double break lead. In Hamburg, again, Nadal with some absolute thievery in that one, especially in the first set. Coming back from 5-1, 40-30 on Federer's serve in that first, and pulling that final out by a hair. There was no real indication for that '08 RG final going how it did. You can mark it up to whatever, bad day at the office, plus Nadal probably playing his finest ever clay court tournament. But of course, when the dust settled, it was 6-1, 6-3, 6-0. And from the height that Federer stood at, obviously, mentally that had to be just a harrowing blow. And I'm going to tell you guys, watch the Strokes of Genius documentary on this match if you haven't before. I think it is the finest tennis documentary that I have ever seen. A lot of great insights from the participants of this match, as well as those who were commentating on it, among others. But Federer, of course, spoke in that doc about how much mental baggage because of that match he was carrying heading into the Wimbledon matchup between the two. Of course, we turned the page from clay, and this was grass. It never was going to be that easy, and Roger Federer, in the lead-up to the final, looked a lot more like the player, the 5-time defending champion, and on this just crazy streak on grass going back to '03. Destroyed everybody in his path in Halle and en route to the final. So Nadal, for his part, more or less did the same across Queens, Wimbledon. Personally, '07, '08, hard to get any better than that as far as Nadal's grass court peak. The dude was absolute class. He was very much ready for round 3. Federer, Nadal, Wimbledon. I think for huge chunks of those first 2 sets, you actually saw the scar tissue for Roger Federer against this guy in particular. I mean, there were chances in the first serving it out to get back into it. Second set, it seemed like a story we'd seen before, the Fed Express humming as he raced out to a 4-1 lead. But this time around, it did not follow the script. Nadal reined him back in, weathered the storm. And this is the part where I talk about this match being sort of just quintessential tennis and such a great demonstration of just how beautiful in a way that this game is, and the introspection of it all. Not just what goes on in between the lines, but also the way that this magnificent scoring system that I think is this game's biggest asset, it sort of becomes this reveal in some ways of people's character. There's all these different things. There's before the match started. We've all had experiences in the past that sort of make it harder to perform and create sort of mental blocks. There's these fight or flight moments where down 2-0, Federer, the dialogue is that felt like a blur. I was almost numb those first 2 sets, but if we're gonna go out, it's not going to be tamely. I'm gonna go out swinging, and definitely he did exactly that for the remainder of this match. It's another testament to the beauty of best of 5. All these different things that weigh mentally that both sides have to deal with. Nadal on the flip side, from as early as the third set, he actually has a love 40 to effectively put the nail in the coffin, and you see a little bit of the theme for him on the rest of the match, where he is at the absolute precipice of his dream, really, of his ultimate, most prized accomplishment, and that was winning Wimbledon. And if you've read his book before from 2011, he talked about it as the fear of winning, which I know if you've played tennis at any level, so many of us can relate to. Anybody really can relate to. How easy would it be if you were able to play with the same freedom every single point as you do when a match has just gotten rolling, or you've gotten an early break, or you're up a set? Fact is, you can't. Try as you may. You simply cannot avoid the thoughts creeping in your head of skipping steps, of looking ahead a little bit. And none more encapsulating of that moment than, of course, in the fourth set breaker when Nadal goes up 5-2 with 2 serves to come. And again, we have all been there before, where step into the line to serve, your only thought in your head, after you miss that first serve in particular, is just don't double fault. And before you even toss that ball up to serve, you already know what's going to happen. A prompt double fault in kind. For the better part of 5 hours, you were seeing 2 of the best ever, both as far as ability, but also as far as managing these ebbs and flows that are part and parcel with tennis at any level, doing that at the absolute highest level. And of course, so many iconic moments. The fourth set breaker, the back-to-back passing shots. Nadal dealt with another moment that could have been an inflection point, with the title on his racket and serve, getting the first ball forehand that he would have signed up for in a heartbeat to win Wimbledon, and it followed his patented pattern going into the Federer one-handed backhand. But of course, it yielded that 1% outcome of just a picture-perfect passing shot off the wing that his forehand had absolutely tormented for years. And of course, you're dealt with another one of these moments where the mental baggage, the stuff of years past, starts coming in. 2 match points come and gone, basically within a hair of your dream, and that quickly, it's all erased, and effectively you have to win the match all over again. For all intensive purposes, heading into the 5th set, it is love all again. How do you respond? And of course, there's so many different ways you could have internalized all of it. There's the hindsight. It's like, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have approached his forehand that time. There's the point of ruining all these opportunities. I would think this is the one that would probably be most common, where it's a bit of woe is me, where it's like, I did everything right, and how unlucky could you possibly be to potentially be staring in the face an outcome where that still very well may not be enough. But the one that Rafa Nadal chose, as we know, in the rain delay early in the 5th set, going back in, he told his uncle, relax, I got this. I'm not going to let the regrets of '07 start creeping in. I'm going to make for damn sure that if it's the last thing I do on a tennis court, I won't allow something like that to repeat itself. The exact quote being something along the lines of, Federer may win this match, but I'm not going to be the one to lose it. And to approach the home stretch of that match the way that he did, especially at one point 5 points from losing the title at 3-4, 30-40, it's another one of the most coveted qualities I think that you have to be a great champion in tennis, and that is the ability to reset. And Rafa Nadal might be, at least within matches, the best that I have ever seen in that respect. And no better instance of that than this match. To be able to put everything behind him, to be completely undeterred until the very end. He saved that break point with complete fearlessness, just roping a forehand up the line to set up a smash. And the remainder of the match, he just kept coming and coming, and Roger Federer's serve, for the most part, over and over again, it continued to save the day, but the pressure was relentless. Obviously, a couple of points down the home stretch of that match that belong in the all-time Nadal highlight reel that will throw in a time capsule for future generations. And finally, at long last, 7-all in the 5th, the dam finally broke. And on his 4th match point, it would be Nadal collapsing to the grass as flashing camera light illuminated the court that was pretty much entrenched in darkness at that point. And of course, that's another part of this match and its mystiques, the rain delays, finishing late into the evening, the pictures from the trophy presentation and from the match in general. You roll all that into the ebbs and flows, the A++ drama paired with these just iconic shots, rallies. For those that think this is an overrated match, I would still say, even if you don't think it's an A+ quality match, I would still say it falls no shorter than A level. But all of that rolls into one to give this match, of course, this like sort of biblical quality. It really is the quintessential tennis match for the masses, and I think rightfully so. And Rafa, for his part, when he got up off the grass, the computer did not read that he was number one in the world after this match. There would still be just a little bit more waiting for that, but for all intensive purposes, it was the 2008 Wimbledon final that brought full circle his chase down of Roger Federer, and for the first time allowed him the title of the best player on the planet. But up top, it's the 2010 US Open. This tournament definitely would fit in here on the list somewhere regardless. It's a big moment. Career Grand Slam obviously was brought home. It enshrined Nadal as this all-time legend, arguably at the absolute peak of his powers at the time. And while it definitely is a signature moment, no question, I make no qualms about saying it occupies the top spot, mainly because it's my favorite moment of Nadal's ever. Honestly, for it being number one, it's probably going to be the least I speak on, because I can't really say more about it than I did in my US Open 2010's ranking. It is just quite simply my favorite version of my fave ever by a country mile. Call it what you want, but this is realistically where my diehard standum was born, and it was as good a point as any in his career to get started. Until that point, I wasn't actually that into tennis. My dad was the diehard Federer stan, and I was the kid Nadal fan in name only because I really liked his hair. But how amazing was my inauguration as a diehard, as I started to really watch every single one of his matches. And I was there in the stadium weeks prior when Marcos Bagdatis showed him the exit at Cincinnati, my hometown backyard tournament. I was reduced to tears in the crowd that day, like the little boy that I was. But how quickly the tides turned weeks later, when watching this buzzsaw version of Rafael Nadal at the 2010 US Open, I was convinced that I was watching God himself on a tennis court. On the court, things could not have been any more crisp, just brimming with confidence. Like, he was hammering the ball from the baseline, the volleys, drop volleys, the point construction, the passing shots. It all could not have been more on point. Still at a point in time where his speed was close enough to peak. And of course, it didn't hurt that on court, this was maybe the coolest that he's ever looked. That night outfit, I own the jacket and shoes to this outfit. Shout out eBay. This dude just looks so damn cool. Perfectly fit for a guy who at the time was a man on a mission. The most dominant that he has ever been off of clay, in my opinion. Uber efficient, obviously no sets dropped at Roland Garros. It was a very much survive and advance first week of Wimbledon. But as we saw so often, as the grass wears out, Nadal grows stronger, and he actually came into the final of the 2010 US Open going back to after dropping the first set of his quarter at Wimbledon, winning 28 sets in a row, the 28th of which was the first of the final, playing like an absolute demon. For my money, the most entertaining version of him as well was at this tournament. He was blasting off of both wings. Not to mention, the biggest story, his beefed up serve, really just being in flow state throughout the course of this tournament, routinely delivering over the 130 mark, as high as 135. Everything couldn't have been more on point. It is very much the closest approximation that you can make in the hypothetical that we do so often, where we see players to compensate for their loss of their physical gifts. They improve in these auxiliary areas of their games. It's why so often you see the early mid-30s these days become a bit of a sweet spot, where a lot of these players have grown smarter, savvier, a lot of times become more offensive-minded, and you wonder, what if you threw the mind, the brain of these dudes at that point in their careers into their younger athletic prime versions? Well, for Rafa, this to me is the answer for that, as far as the closest resemblance of what that would look like. Plus, add on easily the best serve of his career, and the product was this just absolute peak dominant version of Rafael Nadal taking the court throughout the 2010 US Open. And there you have it, the 10 greatest Rafael Nadal moments of all time by my estimation. Honestly, did not anticipate this video being this long. I know for non-fanboys like myself, making it to this point in the video may not have been up your alley. This video in general may not have been up your alley. I totally understand that. Considering I'm just getting back on the wagon on this channel right now, I also understand that my spot in the algorithm, this video probably, in all likelihood, doesn't reach the amount of people that would justify me putting in this much time, this much work into this video in particular. But hey, what can I say? I'm just a demon of a fan. At this point in time, we are 2 weeks removed from Rafa's 40th. But it is what it is. Feliz cumpleaños, campeón. The great man for the better part of 15 years as a tennis fan, made me feel things that I never have and never will feel as a fan. So even if I yapped, I hope it was interesting. In a way, made a documentary of my own to contribute to the Rafa sphere. Hope you all enjoyed it. And of course, I will catch y'all in the next one.